Hello, and welcome to Fiction Hack, the podcast where we attempt to enhance our understanding and enjoyment of the modern story. My name is Colin Monroe, and this is
Ross Lawhead. Hello.
And it's a very special week because it is coming up to Halloween, and we've got some very special plans. Ross,
Yes.
do you want to tell people about our special plans?
Yeah, so we're planning a two-parter for the Universal Classic Monsters movies, which are good fun in and of themselves, but I think they're really interesting to study in sort of today's context of the movie industry in Hollywood and whatnot.
Okay, so that's
yeah.
so this is part one, and then later this week we'll be giving you an extra episode, which will be part two
Yes.
of that, and then next week continuing the Halloween theme. Halloween theme.
Halloween theme.
Yeah.
We'll be doing. We'll be discussing a lost Dracula manuscript, what I believe is the first draft of Dracula, was unearthed a couple years ago in Iceland, of all places. So I think it's a fascinating story, and I can't wait to talk about that one as well.
Great. So Universal Monsters. You're
Yes.
talking about things like vampires. And, right.
I mean, we mostly know what these are, and they're easy to explain because it is the original Dracula movie. You know, Bela Lugosi, I am Dracula. You know, come into my home, all that kind of stuff. It's the Boris Karloff Frankenstein. You know, the with the flat top and the they're not bolts, they're electrodes on his neck. It's kind of, this is the thing. It's kind of it's slightly nebulous. But you've got those kind of three core guys of Bela Lugosi's Dracula, Boris Karloff's Frankenstein, and Lon Chaney Jr.'s Wolfman. And I don't know. I've been a huge fan of these like almost my entire life because I remember when I was a kid at the school library, they used to have these kind of illustrated books of the movies, which would tell you kind of the story and behind the scenes kind of stuff of that one. The Invisible Man I liked a lot as well. That was part of it, and these are the old black and white ones. And so I read those books like a good 10 or 15 years before I even saw the first movies. Because the books were easier to get hold of at that time than the movies
So hang on, are
themselves.
you talking books of the movies or like the original books? These things
No.
are based
So these
on,
are books of the movies. Yeah. So it wasn't Bram Stoker's Dracula, which I read that as well, but that was much later. These were picture books of the movies, the making of the movies. I wish I could find those again. It crosses my mind every once in a while to go looking for them on the internet. But yeah, I would check those out again and again. And I was checking out other stuff like, ghost stories and stuff. So it was a part of this kind of interest I had just in kind of supernatural stuff, which a lot of kids have at that time. But yeah, so I was aware of these through that. And, we're all aware of, these characters in kind of Western culture just because the word gets used a lot these days, but I think they are iconic. You can show just a silhouette of Frankenstein, exactly what that is and what that means and the story behind it. And I would say same as with Dracula. Just a profile view of him, you get an idea of it, and it gets spoofed and lampooned or just referenced as a touchstone for a lot of different things. So yeah, just in terms of in and of themselves, they're quite interesting. But then also as it went on, we got the first crossover movie in history as well. So whereas like Marvel right now is making a lot of bank on having crossovers. Not only do all their characters get together in the Avengers, but their own characters will show up in other movies as well. You get Thor Ragnarok has got Hulk as kind of a main character as well. But Universal was the first one to do that in the mid 40s, and so we'll talk a bit about that as well when it comes up. But I don't know. Do you want to?
So hold on. When
do you want
saying,
to start from the beginning?
When we're saying Universal, you mean Universal the company, right?
So
the studio, not just Universal, as in these are universally recognized monsters.
Yeah, so the Universal Studios, as opposed to like Fox Studios or
Yeah.
Marvel Studios or any other kind of movie house. And so, yeah, let's take a run up on this and say that I had kind of grown up with the assumption that there was kind of a core canon of monsters that this movie studio, Universal, would make movies about from time to time. But doing some research, even just the last couple of weeks, I found out that that's actually not the case. It was far more. I think I used the word nebulous before, but it was kind of There weren't any real kind of criterion for who was a core member and who was not. It would be kind of the same. I guess it is kind of the same with the Marvel Studios. It's like, well, you don't know if the X-Men are in the same universe as Captain America because they could be. There isn't anything that has been said that says that they're not. But it is possible that they're going to bring them in the future. And now that I think it's been announced that they've actually got the rights, which everybody knew for a while. It seems like it is going to be likely, but. Yeah, so Universal Studios started up, I don't really know when, but they were making movies in the silent era. So, if we say that movie production started late, right tail end of the 1800s, we've got about 20 or 30 years of the silent movies being developed, and I love silent movies. I think there's a really different artistry that carried over a little bit into the sound period, which we'll talk about in a second. But they I don't know. I've heard different things. Saying that they were a successful movie theater. They must have been. They're still around now, but also that at that time they were just kind of like a B movie studio. They would make just kind of anything that they were kind of commissioned to make, but then they'd make their own kind of features as a way to try to keep up with the big boys at the time. Who I don't know who they would have been. Probably United Artists or whatever, but. So they would every once in a while, make what we would now consider a horror movie. It's just a movie with a kind of a gothic setting. Maybe it's dealing with a subject of murder or some sort of supernatural aspect or something like that. In fact, their early pictures that we now classify as their horror movies were based on kind of well-known European stories. We've got The Hunchback of Notre Dame, which is Victor Hugo, of course. That was, I think a lot of people point to that as the first horror movie. So it's starring Lon Chaney, who was very famous for his makeup effects and, just the way he could kind of change his body and his personality into this sort of, remember this is silent movies, so it's not about the dialogue or projection or anything like that. It is about how you carry yourself and present yourself
just the physical
on screen.
Of the
Exactly. Yeah. So that was kind of that was a big budget, kind of a risk for Universal at the time. They built an exterior of Notre Dame so that Lon Chaney as the Hunchback could kind of caper around on it. And Lon Chaney was an established star at that time. He was he had come from the stage, as a lot of the actors had. But he was what turned out to be kind of towards the end of his career. But they still brought him in for Phantom of the Opera, which was a couple years after that. That one is more well known now. I think because it does have more of the traditional, what we now think of as the traditional horror tropes in it. Kind of a mask and murders and even just kind of the grand scale kind of the Paris Opera House. Which they replicated the interior for, and all that kind of thing. So, okay, I'm only bringing those in to say that it wasn't a focused effort to say, well, let's just start making monster movies. They kind of fell into it a little bit and started creating the genre as they went along. And a lot of what we now kind of focus on and say, well, there's The Man Who Laughs, there's Cat and the Canary, there's all these kind of movies. Well, they were just kind of taking shots at different things and trying to find an audience for their movies. And it just happened that these were, well, it may have just happened. The people who were making these were able to make them in a really good way. You had directors like Paul Lenny, especially, who was, I believe he was a German. There was a movement called German Expressionism, which was developed in Germany, of course, during the silent era, and it was. It's harder to explain than it is to show, but it's, well, if you think of terms of expressionism in terms of painting, whereas you have representationism, which is like, well, this looks like the thing that you're painting, and then you have expressionism, like, well, this is what I felt when I looked at this landscape, and here it is on the canvas. So it's not abstract, but it's sort of giving an expression of what you're seeing instead of the literal thing that you're seeing. That's similar with cinema as well. So, here is an attic set. Well, here's an expression of what it feels like to be in an attic. So everything is skewed, in a way that would be impossible in the real world. But so it's all kind of slanting off to one side. Or here's what a big staircase looks like. It's just what it feels like with the expression that you get when you have a big staircase. So. Did I say Hunchback was the first horror movie? Captain of Caligari was the first horror movie, according to experts, and that is a pure German expressionist film. And it's got things opening at impossible angles. The story itself is even a bit skewed in a sort of unrealistic way, but it's all to give an effect of suspense and just kind of unease even in the viewer. And it's a very successful film still, but we had people coming over to Hollywood to make their careers from Germany, who were bringing some of these sensibilities over with them, and they were meeting other people from France. I learned that the set designer for Phantom of the Opera actually was a French architect, and he had spent time in the Paris Opera House, and he knew the kind of below stage setup for that. And apparently Paris has got some sort of amazing underground network, which is just kind of closed off. And
you mean
I think
the whole
a lot
city,
of these,
or you mean the
whole city, yeah. And I think a lot of these old structures, kind of play into that as well. But
but there's people who've gone down there exploring and then got lost and never been found again.
Probably, yeah. Or maybe they join up some sort of subterranean society.
Like parties down there and things, and like illegal parties. And I remember seeing a TV show. It's an American show where they're like ghost hunters or something, where they went down. They went down there. Yeah.
Well, it comes up in Les Miserables as well. There's a scene that takes place there, London's got some other. There's the Fleet River has gone missing because they built over it so many times. No one knows where that river is anymore. But it's probably near or underneath Fleet Street at some point. But
so you must have studied underground. I know that you studied underground Britain quite a lot. Is research for your novels. The Realms They're Under, which has that as a theme, really. Which everyone should go out and buy. Everyone should go out and buy that. The Realms They're Under, parts 1, 2, and 3. Yeah. Excellent novels written by. You
can buy it if you want. Yeah, I don't get any money from those anymore. But
how come?
It's a long story. We can talk about that in another episode. It'll be a very long and boring episode. But there's reasons. Because reasons. That's why. But. Yeah. So where were we? Okay. So so you had all these kind of you had this new artistic movement coming in through Hollywood, attracted basically by the money, and that brought this what we would now classify as a Gothic sensibility, as a sort of carry-on extension from the German Expressionist kind of periods, and it really only carried on in horror. It wasn't preserved in any other genre, I don't think.
So what was it that characterized the German, what do you call it, German Expressionism?
Expressionism. I think just that, just a sense of unreality to the setting.
Okay.
Which again, which horror, it's very good, and that's kind of what you want for horror, is just this kind of uneasy feeling about, well, there's all these kind of dark shadows, that people could be hiding in. There's a little bit of unreality to the background, and there's a little bit of unreality to the characters, and so you're never quite sure what's happening. If it's used well, and these early movies did use it very well, then it all adds to the sense that you're getting with just with the story. It's a storytelling element is the background. I think a lot of time people forget that. We talked about it in Die Hard. They remembered that for that, and they used just the way everything was kind of shot in the lens, what was to give you a certain effect of what's going on with the characters at that time. And it's an old craft, so I wouldn't say it's lost, but I don't think most people do it or spend time thinking about it. They just say, well, we'll set up here and you guys we'll shoot a reversal, and then we'll cut it all together later. These were kind of very deliberately staged because, again, a lot of these guys were coming from a theater background where you have a set, you have a stage, and you have your performance. And the best, I'm not saying that all of them were doing this at this time, but the best ones were considering the environments and the backdrop as a creative element in the storytelling itself. So, excuse me. So you had these kind of 1920s movies, silent movies, dealing with kind of gothic subjects, starting to create this kind of horror genre. And then you had the advent of sound technology for film. Come in around about 1928. And there's no hard line because not everybody switched over to sound at the same time. It was a technology I kind of had to get used to. Yeah. But, the best... It's
kind of like 3D. Well, maybe it's
well, exactly. No, it is like 3D. It's as if, 3D did actually add something to the movie instead of take away from it. And everyone decided, well, okay, well, I guess we'll all go in on 3D. It would have been like
but
that.
That's the reason I said maybe it's not, because I don't think 3D... I think they'll still continue to make some movies in 3D, but it's not going to switch over to be like all movies are made in 3D. Like it has done with sound.
Exactly,
Nobody's making... Well, I'd say that, but there was that one movie a few years ago. That was a silent movie.
Oh, yeah, the Artist.
The Artist, which was really good, but
they'll do a silent movie every once in a while.
Nobody's making silent movies now.
No, very rarely. I think Mel Brooks did one. There was a silent movie that was on Netflix. I think it was from Spain or something. It was very, very strange. I never got to finish it. I can't remember the name of it. Write in if you remember. But a lot of not a lot of. There were a few artists who are kind of like, if this sound thing is taken off, then I'm kind of done. One of those was Todd Browning, who I mean, did he quit or was he pushed, or jump or was he pushed? People weren't. The directors especially weren't always on board with sound. Some of them leapt into it and did some movies to really good effect. So Fritz Lang was he wasn't an early sound practitioner, but his first sound movie, M, he gave his serial killer, who you only kind of see in shadows, kind of stalking his prey, as it were. He gave him a whistle. So every time you heard this whistle, then you knew he was around and something was going to happen, long before you saw him.
And that was actually the character themselves whistling, or was it like the score?
No, it was the character themselves whistling. So it was technically what we called a diegetic soundtrack for this character would come in. And so he would just walk along whistling. Alfred Hitchcock was someone who started making silent movies and then, came into sound as well. His first one, I think is it called Knife or is it just Murder? But he did a really clever trick where this lady does get obsessed with this knife, which is a murder weapon, and she hides it, and then she's hearing this conversation that's taking place in another room, and you don't hear all of the conversation, but you do hear the word knife said repeatedly through the conversation. So the idea that you hear sound imperfectly is, I think, a really advanced one for the first silent movie that you're going to make. And there are other examples as well. There is Carl Dreyer movie that I really like called Vampire, which maybe we could talk about next year. Again, just using not only he was using in that movie kind of surrealist images. Or images that don't really relate to each other, juxtaposed together to give you a sense of a place, but then also using sound in the same way, so that you're hearing sounds which are also making you a little bit uneasy. And although the plot is very loose, it is just almost terrifying to experience. And this is in the early 1930s. So, and I would say I'd hold up some of these movies as well. Because some of these Universal movies, because one of the first sound movies that Universal made was Dracula, and it was again based on a European novel, which Universal had a pretty good track run with. It was also a stage production that had been going on and off for a while. Like an undead vampire, it would kind of. I would really challenge people to watch the original Draculas right now, even if you think you've seen it already. I would say, a lot of people who are the impression that they've seen. Oh yeah, I've seen the original Dracula. I've seen the original Frankenstein. I think some of them actually haven't or weren't paying attention. But these
they
are
may have
worth...
seen an old one because, like you said, they've been made so many times and remade so many times.
Yeah.
That you've seen one from like the 50s or something. You think that's the first one, but actually they've been going back to the 20s.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, 1931 was when the first Dracula came out, the one with Bela Lugosi. And they had wanted to get Lon Chaney for the part. The studio almost demanded it. But unfortunately, he got throat cancer. And he died kind of 33, 34, something like that. So just through health reasons, he was kind of taken out of it. There was an actor who was doing a very successful stage run called Bela Lugosi, and it was the same guy. He was well keen for the part. He actually campaigned to be Dracula in the movie Dracula. And the director, Todd Browning, again, who had come from sound, had a lot of successful in sound movies. He didn't want to do this guy. I think because he wanted to cast an unknown, really. So even Lon Chaney, he probably
and
wasn't
also
too
I
happy
think
with.
as a I've had a history of directing a few short movies in the past, and I would say I wouldn't want to cast someone who's done the role in another production or on like theatre and something, because they're going to have their very strong opinions about how things should be. And when you're the director of a movie, you should be making your vision, and then your vision might be very different to some of the things they were trying to do in the theatre. So you don't want someone who's got strong opinions about it, because you want them to be enacting your vision and not so much their own. You want their opinion and everything, and you want them to sort of study the role and everything, but at the end of the day, it's your vision that is the director's vision that is what everyone should be making, including the actors. And if the actors have worked with another director on a stage production and they know the role really well, there's just a really good chance they're going to have strong opinions that conflict with yours.
Yeah, completely. And I think you've nailed down probably what was Todd Browning's conflict with that. So he was hired as a director, but then from the producer's point of view, the money's point of view, so to say, they're looking at this project, which is on the verge of falling apart. Can't get a main actor. The director is, starting to flake out a little bit. Other directors and actors have already fallen through for this. And you've got this guy who has already got some publicity behind him as Dracula. Then why not just use that guy? He wants to do it. And actually, Lugosi took a quarter pay, essentially. He did it for next to nothing, the actual part, just because he was that enthused about it. And just watching the movie, he's just masterful in it. It's such a unusual performance, and he uses his accent to such a degree that even just listening to him, you're not really sure what he's going to say or how he's going to say it, or what's really going to happen. And they even made a couple plot changes, which I think are superior than the book. Which I guess maybe we'll talk about with the Dracula book coming up. But it was very good. It's a very good movie today. And it's, like I say, it still feels fresh, and there are things which you see it today and you think, I've never seen that before in a movie. You know, the bat, you know, kind of flapping around is obviously a rubber bat, and that's not so great. But, you know, just Lugosi's just kind of look and his demeanor is so unsettling, because it is so perfect for Dracula. It's old world, but it's also very alien and almost kind of inhuman. I think he just nails it. As an interesting kind of footnote as well, there was another team that was filming Dracula at the same time on that same set for Universal, except they were doing everything in Spanish. And the director, George Melford, kind of set it to himself to try to out-technique, you know, these guys who were doing the English version one. And so there are basically two Draculas. Everyone now agrees that the Spanish one is probably the better directed one, certainly from a technical standpoint, with, you know, stuff that they would do with movement. The downside is that the Dracula is terrible. He's a real ham. He didn't really get the part fix in his head, and so. Yeah, it's a bit hard to watch in that, because he's not a completely committed completely committed actor like Bela Lugosi was.
So wait a minute. So they built all the sets and everything, and they thought, well, we might as well make this film in English and in Spanish at the same time.
Yeah, apparently that was not uncommon at that time, especially for Universal, which was trying to just find markets wherever they could.
Right, but it was a separate film in the sense.
So what they would do is, when the American team would film in the daytime, and then they'd all knock off, and then the Spanish language crew would come in for the Spanish language one at night. So, you know, they were using the same sets, and you know, they started, actually the director kind of hung around to see what the American guys would do in the day, and then
it was a whole separate production. It wasn't like they were just the actors weren't following the same direction from the one director. It was a whole new script, new director, new everything.
Yeah, new script, new sound technician, new cinematographer, completely different cast. Everything is different except for the sets. So from a studio point of view, it's great.
The production designer got credited twice?
Yeah, he would have done, yeah. Because,
cool.
yeah, there's the same
paid
sets.
Twice?
Probably not. I doubt
it.
I don't have the exact information in front of me, but I doubt he got paid twice, because, you know, that's the whole point of doing this, is that you can use the same
and he
sets.
only did it once, so, yeah.
Make two movies the same amount of time, and, you know, there's a large Spanish speaking market out there as well. I mean, they've done that from time to time. You were saying
that with Doctor Who, that was kind of what Doctor Who was at the beginning. Is they were just using the sets that were being for other big BBC productions.
Yeah, sets, costumes, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Which, again, I think it probably turns out to be less practical in the long run than you'd think. Not sure why. Really,
and they do similar things to this day. Like, you know, a lot of Universal Studios is, I mean, it's a theme park now, but it's still a working studios, and they've got that big town square, which was the big part of Back to the Future, but it's been in hundreds of other movies. Yeah. And, you know, they're constantly, like, tearing parts of it down and rebuilding it for another movie, but then they leave it. And then they got streets and streets of just houses, which are actually, like, offices of production companies, but then they can also use the whole street as a film set. I think Tesla went and they kitted out a couple of the houses with some of their new solar panel roof tile things, and they did their product launch there.
That's pretty good.
Just to sort of show in a private sort of residential area, you know. Yeah. And
well, I mean, they've still got the interior of the Paris Opera House as well. So that's probably, I think it's the oldest film set, you know, still surviving in the world. They've got that replica.
And is that in Universal Studios?
Universal, no. Yeah, in the same spot. People still shoot there if
Florida?
they need it.
Or is that in LA?
That's in LA, yeah.
Right.
So I mean, it's worth seeing the Spanish language Dracula just kind of as a kind of fun little side. But obviously the first Dracula is the one we kind of recognize now. That same year, they also did Frankenstein, which again ticks all the boxes. European novel, kind of very gothic, and something that they'd had a lot of success with in the past. It had Boris Karloff. He was actually an English actor who had an English name. Karloff isn't even his well, Boris isn't either. He just kind of chose something that was be a little bit more kind of outlandish, I guess. But yeah, it's that was another very solid success for Universal as well. So in the same year, you've got those two coming out, and
so they're carving out a niche for themselves.
Carving out a niche, exactly, and they're starting to get the ball rolling a little bit with this kind of this new kind of horror thing. The next year they did Murders in the Rue Morgue, which is actually Edgar Allan Poe, so not quite European, but almost. He's kind of old world, East Coast of America, and that I think that was less kind of successful. Even these days, it's a little harder to find that one. We got The Old Dark House, which is the same director as Frankenstein, James Whale, who, if you remember the movie, is it Gods and Monsters, with Ian McKellen and Brendan Fraser? That's about James Whale, the director himself, who was kind of an interesting guy. But he kind of hung around a little bit. Some of these guys were fairly reluctant to kind of keep in with the horror genre, even though they were finding a lot of recognition for it. They felt that they were a little bit too large for just kind of one genre. They didn't want to get pigeonholed. So
how, at this time, how well known were the novels as works of literature before?
Oh, extremely well known.
They were.
Yeah. Yeah, they're as well known as they are today, probably. Like I say, there was they were on stage. They would tour the world essentially. There was even a Frankenstein production that was on during Mary Shelley's lifetime that she actually went to see. It was called something else. I can't quite remember, but so these were kind of ideas that were in maybe not the public consciousness, but the cultural consciousness of the time. And they were written not as classics; they were written as popular fiction for the time, and that did carry over. This, just because of the nature of the medium for movies is that people can see far more movies in a year than they can read books in a year, and in that way, there's a larger audience for movies. Books these days, hundreds of thousands is a hit. For to people to read it is a hit. For movies, you need millions of people to see it in order for it to be a hit.
Yeah, and
so there's a different scale.
Strangely, like a paperback novel is cheaper than a cinema ticket.
Yeah, exactly. But there's there's much more investment of time and concentration, obviously, in a novel, which makes them more cost effective. You can buy one book and you can read it for 10, 12 hours, whereas you're going to see 12 hours of movie, then you're paying up to $50 or more. So I guess it depends what you like. I like the books, obviously, and movies. You have to choose, but
no.
So they kind of kept pursuing the this kind of this method which they developed of trying to find these kind of gothic, or not even just gothic, just kind of weird kind of supernatural tales that were coming from kind of established literary sources, as it were. Because obviously you get The Invisible Man. That's H.G. Wells' novel. They did that one in 1933. That was James Whale again, who did Frankenstein.
And didn't they do some really groundbreaking visual effects for that Invisible Man?
Yeah, for all of them they did with makeup for sure. But Invisible Man, they basically created. There's a lot of terms for it now, but it's the green screen effect, which was not green at that time; it was black. Instead of dressing up
black and white. Yeah.
It was. But
I think what they did is they put a velvet mask over the guy's head, like black velvet, so that basically like absorbed all the light and didn't bounce any light back into the camera, which meant that on the negative, it was completely white, which then meant it was easy to composite in the background
Yeah, I
again.
mean,
Yeah.
it was a roundabout way of doing what we now term green screen.
Yeah.
Right now he would wear a green stocking on his head, or well, blue screen we call it now. It really is green screen. In TV they call it what, color coding? Is that it, or something else?
Chroma key.
But chroma
Chroma
key,
key.
yeah.
But it's all the same now. TV,
Exactly.
film, it's all digital. So
Well, with CGI, yeah, you use the same method, but yeah, that was basically the first thing to kind of to pioneer that. And so and it wasn't just that effect. There was a lot of different effects that they were doing to create this Invisible Man, but you put them together in the same sequence. Even though there are a lot of different shots, a lot of different methods, then it adds up to an overall effect. So, for instance, when the Invisible Man first reveals himself to be invisible, he starts to take the bandages off his head. And yeah, it's that stalking effect that we were just talking about from behind. And then you cut to a front view of him, and it's not that anymore. What it is, it's a maquette, or a kind of a mask, basically, with bits of it kind of cut out, that someone is behind, with real hands kind of to keep unwrapping it. So they're basically unwrapping a puppet without a face. And then it cuts to the side, and then you go into that effect again with the velvet stocking, chroma key, or whatever it's called. And so, when you use a lot of these different tricks all at the same time, especially for an audience which is less technically sophisticated now than we are used to seeing this kind of stuff, your brain wouldn't work out what was happening from one moment to the next, and so you just believe that yes, this is an Invisible Man who's just been revealed before you. And not only that, there were very cheap tricks that were used to great effect in that movie. There was one where there's a whole crowd that's kind of swarmed this boarding house where the Invisible Man is, and he's just gone invisible. Basically, he's taken off all his clothes. And he's rushed out of the building and pushed his way through the crowd. But all it is just everyone has been trained basically just to kind of lurch out of the way at the same time. And I think it's a marvelous effect, but obviously there's no kind of technical change there is happening. I think these days, you'd have to, they would always try to, shoehorn in some CGI to justify that, or to make it, or maybe they just don't have the imagination. But
I think some people do. But yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe if it was a Marvel movie, they wouldn't. But
yeah.
Other movies, remember there are other movies.
There are other movies, true. Yeah. So yeah, this is. There's not much of a sense at that time of yet sequels. So it looks like for the first 10 years or so, they're kind of searching for all these different projects. So, well, what else can we bring in? What else can we bring in? It doesn't really occur to anyone until 1935. It's like, well, let's just do another Frankenstein, which is what they did.
And this
with
was
the Bride
a
of
sequel
Frankenstein.
or a reboot?
Yeah, so Bride of Frankenstein is a sequel.
Okay.
And not reboot. And let's just define sequel now. It picked up all, because we're going to bring up this later on. A sequel is defined as another movie in a sequence of the story which picks up the characters somewhere after the end of the previous movie. So it's the same characters. In this case, it's the same director, same actor. So we still got Boris Karloff, still got Colin Clive as Henry Frankenstein. We got a couple new characters in as well. And it's a continuation of the tale. So, Frankenstein basically says, you've made me, but you haven't made me a mate, basically, someone else who's like me, who I can love, who I can, share my life with, and all that kind of thing. So if you want me to be a person and not a monster, then you have to give me this. And Frankenstein is extremely reluctant, to say the least, to provide this. He doesn't want to, keep making people, but eventually he does, and that's the Bride of Frankenstein.
Right.
And that's the first sequel for Universal monster movies. And that's kind of what has started this idea of, well, maybe these characters exist more than just in the single movies that we're seeing them in. So after that, they decide that they're going to try to explore that a little bit, and they come out with Dracula's Daughter, which is the next year. Apparently, it was going to star Bela Lugosi as as Dracula in it. Although I don't know why. Maybe he didn't want to work for nothing again, but he got cut out of it. But yeah, again, it's kind of fun. It's got some really good moments. It's hard to get hold of these days. Dracula's Daughter. You can get it in a box set of the Universal Monsters Legacy Blu-rays or DVDs. But it's worth tracking down. It's got some very good moments in it. The actress who plays Dracula's daughter is fantastic. It's starting to get a little bit racy. It's got a scene where a woman kind of bares her neck, and there's obviously some sort of electricity going between her and Dracula's daughter, which you're starting to get the censors paying attention to these movies and saying, wait a second, maybe these things aren't just, maybe we shouldn't be
So what was the
these
state
things.
of censorship at that point?
Well, there was a big crackdown at one point during the 30s. And so you do have a pre-censorship era, they call it. And that's not to say that everybody was taking their clothes off and there were no rules or anything, because there were. But it was, basically kind of
Culture in general was a lot more conservative
exactly
back then. Yeah. So.
But then with horror, see, a lot of people say this, I believe it, not everybody thinks it, but it can be as effective or more effective without showing any of that stuff. When you're not showing the explicit image, when you're letting your brain when you're just alluding to something, then letting your brain fill in everything else. So it becomes that point, very hard to point your finger at something and say, well, we can't do this. Because you can't say, well, we're not showing anything happening.
Yeah, well, I think there's a really good example of that. I think it's Last King of Scotland, which is, you watch that and you think, oh, that was a really, really violent movie.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, and there's a lot of guns and things, but you never actually see a gun go off in frame.
Right.
But you leave the movie thinking that thinking that it was you saw loads, but you didn't.
Yeah,
It's
that's
so
a great
well
movie,
directed
and exactly, and acted as well. Forrest Whitaker. Is it Mugabe? He's being. But because again, I think it could be classified as maybe a horror movie because again, you've got this very unpredictable character is doing all this horrific stuff. Exactly, and so it can. And I think when this happens, and it's not just in movies that this kind of thing has happened. Comic books went through this as well. That it becomes so hard to kind of define, well, what's allowable and what's not. We're not showing this person being attacked. We're not showing this person dying. We're not showing this person, any sort of physical assault. But obviously something has happened. It's. You just you have the sense, and so then it becomes ultra conservative, and it says, well, you can't show a kiss for more than 3 seconds. You can't show, somebody. You can't show a woman's shoulder. You can't show this. You can't show that. So that's what we get.
They start making all these rules, and and Peter Jackson's actually famous for trying to look for loopholes in the rules, and I think. There's there's like a character that they made in the Lord of the Rings movies of the chief orc guy and who's like a really badass orc. And there's a scene where it's like, okay, they're not allowed to show blood splurting out of a wound. That's because that's a rule, Well,
that'll put you up to 15 instead of PG-13 or something like that.
Or maybe even 18. So you can do that, but then you're making an 18. But they're like, okay, but you can have the guy stab the guy, pull out the blade, and then lick the blood off of it.
Right.
That's not because the censors didn't say anything about that.
Well, it changes from country to country as well.
Yeah,
I mean, famously in Attack of the Clones, in Britain, if you show somebody getting headbutted, like in a fight, say, then that automatically puts it up to like a 15 or an 18, because they don't want little kids going around recreating that scene and headbutting each other, because that can lead to some really serious medical injuries. So in Attack of the Clones, you've got Obi-Wan Kenobi battling Jango Fett, and I think Jango headbutts him at one point. And for the UK cinema release, they removed that just so they could keep it a U because the Star Wars movie has to be a U.
Yeah. Well, one of them isn't.
But
because my
no,
nephew,
but listen, no.
Go
The
on,
best
go on.
part is that Obi-Wan Kenobi then cuts his head off in that same fight. So you can show
Yeah.
his head getting cut off, but you can't show him getting headbutted.
Yeah.
So you get all that kind of weird stuff.
Yeah, they show boxing on television.
Yeah, the F word as well. Like, apparently you can use the F word and once per movie and still have it be a 15, but the F word cannot be used as relating to the physical act of love. So
Right.
it has to be like just,
It has to be a swear.
An F word. Exactly. It's kind of silly. But, this is the thing. It's like, well, how... in actually the hands of a master movie maker, you can get around these things quite easily, and you can,
Yeah, and I think a lot of
subvert them.
filmmakers like Peter Jackson really enjoy doing that. Like just really
possibly,
looking at the reading between the lines and trying to make something as just take the piss out of the censors basically and say no, we didn't break your rules.
Exactly. Anyway, all right. So where were we? Okay, so Universal has kind of gotten onto this track of saying, okay, well, let's start reusing some of these characters, and still introducing new ones. And it was a surprise to me to find out that I always thought that Wolfman, the Lon Chaney Jr. Wolfman, was one of these kind of early pantheon of villains, these kind of these monsters. But he came much later after Dracula and Frankenstein, 10 years afterwards. There was an earlier werewolf movie called Werewolf of London, which again it's kind of tricky to get hold of these days. And I don't know, people are saying that now it's fantastic, it's amazing, it's a lost classic. I don't see it. I don't think it's that great. It's not that well shot, and the actor was never in for it. Famously, Henry Hull never. They actually developed the makeup that Lon Chaney Jr. used later on, but he refused to wear it because he wouldn't sit in the chair that long. So they had to come with some sort of abridged werewolf kind of makeup. But yeah, so that was kind of so they had hits and misses. That's
So that was another Universal thing, the Werewolf of London.
It was, yeah, it was Universal. Werewolf
Was it set
one.
in London but shot on Universal Studios?
Yeah, it would have been.
In
I mean, most of
right.
these things were, you're set in Europe, and yeah, it wasn't. I mean, yeah, you would hire British actors to play the British parts, but sometimes you couldn't, so you just had to have the American doing the British accent, and that wasn't always convincing, shall we say?
Like in Mary Poppins, Dick Van Dyke.
Yeah, exactly like that. So yeah, yeah, it can be painful, but yeah, Dracula's Daughter was fun because it takes place basically the next scene after Dracula, in that. Van Helsing is just kind of standing there. These two policemen come across this dead body, which was Renfield, and then they investigate a little further, and here's this old man standing over this this coffin, and say, "Well, who's that?" "Oh, that's Dracula." "Well, what happened to him?" "Oh, I killed him." And they're like, "What?" And so the movie kind of takes place after that, and then this lady who claims to be Dracula's daughter shows up on the scene. She wants the body and all this kind of thing. And you're also getting a lot of kind of pathos with the monsters, which I guess is a carry-on from Frankenstein. Frankenstein being a reluctant monster. He doesn't really want to be a monster. He just wants to be a person, but doesn't understand why everybody hates him so much. I mean, he did kill that little girl, I guess. But, Dracula's daughter does not want to be a vampire. Spoiler alert, yeah. In the same way that, Wolfman, Lon Chaney, just doesn't want to be a Wolfman. So, yeah, during this time, we did get a crackdown of the censors. And for a few years, Universal really backed off the whole kind of monster thing. And I think they went back to it just as a way to, just to kind of keep their company afloat. Because after Dracula's Daughter, there was the censorship kind of outcry, and it was 3 years before they kind of went back to the well. They did Son of Frankenstein, which which is kind of a fun one. If you've seen Young Frankenstein, the Mel Brooks with Gene Wilder in it, did you ever watch that?
No.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's kind of a comedy classic. It's hilarious. It is Son of Frankenstein, just with jokes in it. It's the same plot.
Right.
So you've got literally, it's the son of Frankenstein. He's coming back to his father's castle, and he gets kind of roped into kind of recreating his father's experiments. Again, it was post censorship. It was not directed by James Whale. It wasn't directed very well, I think.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the tricks, we're starting to get a lot of recycling of camera techniques, recycling of the sets for sure, the actors. Boris Karloff didn't really want to do it, and he didn't do any more after that as the monster. He felt like this was, the monster story had been told, and he didn't really want to carry on and do it. Bela Lugosi is in it. Bela was always up for a monster movie. In fact, he played the monster a couple times himself in the makeup. He didn't play the next one. The next one was Lon Chaney. Again, Lon Chaney liked the horror genre as it was then. Lon Chaney actually played the Wolfman. He played Son of Dracula, who was also Dracula. He played the monster. And I think the only thing he didn't really take a turn at was the Invisible Man. But yeah, they were all kind of floating around because this was the studio system. You had your rank of actors who you would tap to play different characters. Even the supporting characters started to get reused and stuff. Boris Karloff was more reluctant. But we'll come to a funny thing with him later on. Okay, so Son of Frankenstein rounded out the 1930s era of this kind of first wave, well, or second, if you want to count this as being separate to the silent movies, of the Universal monsters. So when we're getting into the 40s, we're starting to see more of an emphasis on sequels and less of an emphasis on original movies. So with 1940, we leap in with The Invisible Man Returns. Obviously, that's playing on the Invisible Man kind of thing. It didn't get the original Invisible Man, who was Claude Rains, who's one of my favorite actors. But it was kind of continuing that ethos. They also did The Invisible Woman, which was released the same year. So obviously those two kind of had to be in production pretty much at the same time. There was The Mummy's Hand, which is a continuation of The Mummy.
Case of reusing the same sets?
No, it wouldn't have been the same sets. But obviously it's banking on the same characters, the same kind of that recognition of well, you like the Invisible Man, let's see the Invisible Woman, next.
And it's funny. It's funny. You say that in the 40s they were getting into doing lots and lots of sequels and not so much originals, because that's something that that's some very, very modern criticism of nowadays.
Colin, it always comes up, and it's strange. You can set your watch by it because it's a continual criticism of the movie industry. Is like movies aren't as original as they used to be, and they've been saying it for almost 100 years.
And is it really just the way people are remembering things?
It's the way people are remembering things. When you start, and I'm sure you went through this with me. As a young buck, looking at the movie industry and kind of figure out what all this stuff is. Everything is new and exciting to you, and you're seeking out, and searching for the hidden gems and the out of the way things and the foreign movies and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then you kind of realize, hey, Hollywood's just redoing all this stuff over and over again. They're making another Star Wars movie. Well, they've been making other Star Wars movies for 40 years almost. It's a perennial criticism, and I think Hollywood isn't even as ashamed of it as people think they should be, because why would they be? I mean, they've got an Oscar for Best Adapted Screenplay and then a separate one for Best Original Screenplay. So there's a recognition that within the industry that you've got the figure when you and I were at film school in the early 2000s, they were saying, 51% of movies this year were based on other material, that had already been written either as a book or as another movie or something else. And so, it's always, but there's that famous quote by, who is it? It's Euripides or something, or Socrates or Plato. They're saying, "Oh yeah, young people these days, they don't have any respect for their elders. All they want to do is just sit around and get drunk." And it's one of those things. It's just so it's a criticism now. It is a criticism then, and some of these sequels were quite good. Some of them were extremely bad. They do not work out, then it is awful. But in any case, in the 40s, there was a kind of shift just in the feel of these movies. And you were getting sequels. You were also getting a few original properties. The only one which is really wildly popular was The Wolfman, which is 1941. It had Lon Chaney Jr. as the Wolfman. It had Claude Rains, who was the Invisible Man previously. It had Bela Lugosi as Bela, the traveling gypsy. It kind of had the stable of actors, and that was really kind of one of the only big success they had at that time. And that then led them to Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, which I think we got to hold off on talking about.
Okay, yeah, because this is episode 1, this is part 1 of Universal Monsters, and in part 2, we're going to be looking at sort of the first expanded universe and the first sort of movie crossovers, and so that's what that will be about. Yeah. But if you've enjoyed this episode, let us know on Twitter with the hashtag FictionHack. And you can always check out our website, fiction-hack.com.
Yep.
And
they'll have all the show notes in it, so anything that I referenced I'll put in there along with dates as usual and that kind of thing.
And affiliate links, because
because we got to eat as well.
Yeah, we got to eat as well. And we can find you on Twitter as well, can't we?
Yep, I'm at Ross Lawhead.
And I am Colin_Munro on Twitter. But yeah, so next episode's going to come out later this week.
So tune in later. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, see you everybody.
See you then. Bye-bye.
Sorry, I'm going to take a sip of water.
Okay.
I don't know what's wrong with my throat.
It's all right, we'll cut this out. Cut this out.
Okay. Red leather, yellow leather, red leather, yellow leather. So Fritz Lang